Today we'll be discussing Yuri Bronfenbrenner's ecological theory. Now this theory makes for an interesting model because it is a compelling way to get people to think about how complicated human development really is. We often want really simple answers to complicated questions, like why people do drugs. Well, if there was one reason why people did drugs, we would have solved that problem by now. So clearly, there's a much more complicated answer, and it's going to be different reasons for different people. And so that's where this theory comes in. It helps us to think about the different types of influences on human behavior. The idea behind Bronfenbrenner's theory is that it's made of a bunch of layers. You start with the person in the middle, and from there, we go to the more immediate context, and then out to the bigger picture. So in the middle, you have the individual. Their age, their sex, their gender, do they have any special needs, anything like that. Then we get to what's usually listed as the first level of this theory, which is the microsystem. And these are your immediate environments. So for a child, this could be their school, their peers, or their family. Who do they live with or interact with? And what is their relationship with those people? Do they have supportive teachers? Is their parent feeling stressed out by money? Are their parents fighting? Is the child being bullied? And so on. Then for adults, your microsystem might include your job, or this class, or the place where you live. From there we pull out to the mesosystem. The mesosystem is just the relationship between your microsystems. So for a child, for example, it might be the relationship between family and school. Do the parents get along with the teacher? Do they trust the teacher? Do they feel comfortable going to the teacher if there is a problem? Or it might be relationships between where the child lives and their family. If they live in an unsafe area, how does this affect the rules that their parents are setting for them? The exosystem gets even more complicated. This is now a link between two settings. One is a setting that you have an immediate role in, and one is a setting that you don't. So for parents, maybe it's the relationship between the parent's job and the child's school. If the parents have really fluctuating work hours, or have to work very long hours, the child is not directly involved in the parent's workplace, but this will affect things like whether the parents are able to volunteer in the child's school. Your college's board of trustees would be an example of an exosystem for you, because you have probably never met the trustees, but they do affect your immediate environment because they affect things like your tuition, fees, who gets hired, school policies, and things like that. So that's your exosystem. And then finally we have your macrosystem, which is the larger social and cultural context. So this can be a country's culture, but of course that's not one big monolithic culture. So we can also talk about the culture of a religious group, or a military culture, or the culture of very urban versus rural areas. We can also look at broad social contexts, such as the country's political climate. And then finally, just to make the whole thing a little more complicated, we have the chronosystem, which has to do with the role of time. Part of this relates to when events occur in a person's life. For example, we can talk about how people are typically affected by becoming parents. But the effects of this are very different if someone becomes a parent for the first time at the age of 16, or the age of 26, or 36. The other element of the chronosystem is the larger historical context. So, for example, somebody who's in their 50s today might have different views about money and different spending habits compared to what today's 20-year-old will do when they are in their 50s. That's going to be because of changes in the general cost of living, expectations of what it will cost to save for retirement, etc. So we have these layers which start at the middle and go out. But it's important to remember that there's not always a nice clear division between one layer and the next. As an example, let's look at someone who is starting college this year, and we can think about what might affect his major and his odds of success. At the individual level, we need to look at his intelligence, his personality, and so on. At the microsystem level, we would look at what majors are even available at his local college, and whether he can afford to go elsewhere if he wants. But then we have to look at the larger context. At the level of the mesosystem, we might want to see whether his family and his employer will be supportive. If his employer is constantly changing his work hours, he might be less likely to succeed regardless of his intelligence or motivation. At the exosystem level, we might look at whether the state legislature has slashed the higher ed budget. The macrosystem is that larger cultural context. So we'd want to know if this guy's cultural or subcultural groups view education as even being worth it. And gender roles may constrain what majors he thinks are acceptable. And finally, we'd look at the chronosystem. Is this person going to college at age 18 or at age 48? Is he going to college in 2021? Or was this during the Vietnam War, when college might have been a good way to avoid military service? Or was this during the 19th century, when college was only for the wealthy and only a small segment of that population? And you would have had very different majors than you might have today. So we hope this has provided a context for Bronfenbrenner's ecological theory. Thank you very much for listening.